we as psychologists like to break everything down. We have lots of theories that break down all this stuff about how people think and feel and do and all this stuff. And those are really helpful to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Except I don't experience my life that way. I don't have these little chained events going on in my head that I experience. It's as if a thought pops into my mind, or I'm just experiencing a feeling. It's as if it's happening in this moment, because it is.
Yeah.
And I actually can't do anything about it until I experience it.
Welcome to Jesus in the Upper Left, where we're talking about gospel multiplication in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, we are here with Dr. Bart Fowler and Pete Armstrong from Park Lane Church. How you doing, Pete?
Fantastic. Yep.
Awesome. And I'm Oshawa Hawthorne, and we're recording another episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. And we've been in this series talking about emotional health for ministry families, and we've been interviewing a lot of different Christian counselors, and so now we have Bart here, Dr. Fowler, to talk to us, and so I'd love you just to introduce yourself to our audience and a little bit of your background, how you got into counseling.
Sure. So I'm Bart Fowler. I have a doctorate in psychology from George Fox, and I'm a licensed psychologist. But prior to that, I graduated from Talbot Seminary with a degree in marriage and family ministry. And that was going to be my focus, I thought. Things changed a little bit. And so that gets into the story of where I'm at this point is in high school, I was pretty certain I was going on to either engineering or architecture. I had taken a lot of mechanical drawing, architectural classes, and it was geared that way. All that was moving forward until I actually got to talk to a architect and find out what most architects did. And especially at that time before CAD, it was extremely boring because you basically copied other people's drawings or put in the electrical outlets or things where they go. And I thought, that's going to kill me. So, because I thought it was all this really creative thing. So,
where were you living at the time? Like, where did you grow up?
At that time, I was living in Escondido, California.
Oh, funny, yeah.
So, near San Diego.
That's where my brother was born, before I came along, but my parents lived there as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was great growing up there. My parents, we moved around on average every 2 years, so lots of different places. I was born in Portland. Lived here a couple of years. We moved to California, moved back, then to Florida, several places in Southern California.
Yeah.
Then, again, other places, school things. And then my wife and I came up here to Portland to go to school.
Nice.
So at that time, it was Western Seminary. So we started there. And then they moved that counseling. It was a psychology program. It moved to George Fox. So we made the transition.
Yeah.
So out of high school, things changed. Sort of lost interest in that. Not really quite sure what I was going to do. At the same time in high school, I came to know Jesus. I became a Jesus follower. And that started changing a lot of things. What was important to me, found a community of people to be with. A lot of things began to change.
Yeah.
And a few years later, I thought, well, maybe I'll go into ministry. And fortunately, I had a very wise college pastor who said, because I thought I'd go and be a scholar and study history and stuff and then go in and be a theologian. And he said, a lot of ministry is working with people. You might want to take a few classes on people. And I respected him, so I thought that was great. So I took a class on interpersonal communication, and I was blown away because people actually studied like how people communicate, and that just boggled my mind. And I thought it was really interesting because it really clicked. It made a lot of sense to me, and that started a journey on trying to figure out more of that. And eventually led to a degree in communications from Biola, then went to Talbot. And through lots of different circumstances, ended up graduating there with a degree in marriage and family ministry, with a plan to be a counseling minister.
Okay, like in a church setting.
In a church setting. well, particularly then, that was not a non-existent position, which I found out quickly and realized that's not working. And some of the life adventures happened. And when I came back to that saying, counseling is really where I'm supposed to be. What do I do? So I went to interview a bunch of counselors, and the consensus was you need to get licensed.
Yeah.
And that meant going back to school. And I thought, oh, wow, what do I do? I can get a master's. And I thought, I think I'm going to look at doctorate programs. So I looked at several doctorate programs. One was in Portland and was accepted there. We moved up here and so started that journey of being in that program about 7 years. And that was a long course. And eventually graduated. I had 3 kids in the midst of that, working full time. And so, let's see. I got to Charis in 2003 through a journey of working in community mental health for a number of years, had a private practice, and then came to Charis, which is in Vancouver. My wife and I had just moved to Vancouver to be part of a church plant up there. So we were actively involved in the community, and I thought it'd be nice to work there too.
Yeah.
So,
and you were licensed in Washington?
Not yet.
Okay.
So that was a transition that I had to go through to make that happen.
Yeah. But that's like Charis has been around for a long time. So you weren't,
I wasn't at the beginning. I came about 5 years after it launched.
Okay.
Kay Bruce, who started Charis, was a classmate of mine, and that's how I got connected. We ran into each other at a training, and we were catching up about what she's doing and what I'm doing. And she said she's looking for someone to see couples. And I said, well, I see couples. And she said, would you come one night a week?
Oh, okay. There you go.
So, well, let me talk to you some more about that. So I did, found out a little bit more about Charis, and we were living in Vancouver, talked to my wife saying, maybe it's time to switch. So we met with her, started talking more about trying to work full-time at Charis, which up to that point, no one had. So it was a bit of a challenge. We eventually made that switch over, and I also then became an adjunct professor at Western during that time. So that helped augment a little bit and sort of patch together enough income to make it. So
yeah.
Right on.
I mean, I always think that I would enjoy being a counselor. I hope that you love your job and your calling.
I do love it.
I'm sure it's very challenging as well.
It is. There's days that I pull my hair out like everybody else. And next day I get up going, I love what I do, especially when I see good things happen.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the place I'm supposed to be. This is God's calling for me to be doing this type of work. Yeah. I think it matches extremely well with Charis. And that's why I've been there as long as I have.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of times if I have perused people, if I meet someone or I think, is this a person that I would want to refer someone to or that sort of thing? I always, look at their counseling website and see so much of what you see on there is about transformation.
Yeah.
Change, maybe unwanted behavior, getting rid of those sorts of things. So what is your kind of philosophy around that? And, how have you come to that view?
Well, that's what we want, change, right? And things. And so, I could speak of kind of counseling orientations. I think fundamentally people change when they're ready and actually are taking steps, no matter how small, in a direction that faces their struggles, whatever that is being defined as. So when they sort of turn around and face that, they've started that journey. And that's when change is beginning. A lot of people talk about change. They want to change. They know they need to change. But change, I think, is measured best by what people are doing.
Yeah.
So it really is, I'll use the analogy, they're turning around and saying, that's my problem. Instead of me trying to get away from it, I'm going to try to move toward it to address this.
Huh. So kind of staring the monster in the face.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to sprint away from it or something.
Right. We as human beings are really good at not dealing with things, and I include myself in that because I'm really good at not dealing with things.
Yeah.
Until it comes back around and sort of in my face, or my wife reminds me that, hey, it's time to work on this.
Yeah. I was in my sermon writing this morning. I was like telling a story of, is that the Holy Spirit? Or it sounds a lot like my wife's voice. So I don't, maybe
and it's important not for her to confuse the two, and for me not to confuse it. But they often are echoing each other. So
yeah, sure,
I should listen well.
Sure.
Mm. So our friend Micah is the one that told us that we should ask you about the tic-tac-toe or that model. I don't know if something you developed or that you utilize in your ministry. Can you chat about that a little bit?
Sure.
And I don't have a whiteboard.
Yeah,
we can put an overlay on the screen afterwards.
So I'll have to describe it, and I'll have to visualize in my head and then describe that. So this will be a test of communication. So you imagine tic-tac-toe board, right? We all know what that means. It's not a hashtag. It's a tic-tac-toe board. So it has two columns. There's the first column would be just the side of it. So there are actually three columns. So the middle column, and then there's the right-hand column.
Yep.
Right. So the middle column is the things that we control in life. And the far right column is things we don't control. So there's two columns, things we control and don't control. And that's not like earth-shattering. Most people get that. They experience that daily. But the way I define control is really important. I control what I do with my thinking and my feeling in that moment. I control what I do with my thinking and feeling right now. And that's it, period. It's not a moment ago, that's history. It's not a moment from now, that's the future. I can plan for the future. I can learn from history, but I only can do stuff. I can do things about the present.
Yeah.
So it also simplifies all psychology in one sentence, which is probably oversimplified, but it fits with experience. And by that, I mean, we as psychologists like to break everything down. We have lots of theories that break down all this stuff about how people think and feel and do and all this stuff. And those are really helpful to understand what's going on. Except I don't experience my life that way. I don't have these little chained events going on in my head that I experience. It's as if a thought pops into my mind, or I'm just experiencing a feeling. It's as if it's happening in this moment, because it is.
Yeah.
And I actually can't do anything about it until I experience it. I can talk about doing something about my thinking or my feeling, but that's planning. To actually do something about it is when I have it.
Yeah.
So that's why the middle column, actually, if I was drawing on a board, would be very narrow, because it's only what I do with my thinking, feeling at this moment. So, and then everything else on the right-hand column is everything else. That includes everyone else's thinking, feeling, and doing. It includes circumstances, it includes the weather, traffic, all that stuff. So that's a huge column. So those are two columns. There's two rows. So the middle row across is things that is acting on change or making healthy choices. The bottom row across the bottom is not changing something and not acting in healthy ways. So I have a grid. The center of the grid where change and what I control cross is really a place of achievement, of success, of mastery, because I'm taking action on things I actually control myself. I'm dealing with me, what's going on in my head and what's going on in my heart at this moment.
Yeah.
And when I do that, I succeed. For example, if I'm really, really mad with somebody at the moment, I have a lot of adrenaline going, and maybe I'm thinking certain thoughts that I wouldn't want to say out loud. And so if I make a choice in the moment to go for a walk, on the walk, I'm still going to feel really upset because I'm thinking still these certain thoughts about them. But what's going to happen eventually, I'm going to get a little bit tired. I'm going to start calming down. I'll get clearer in my thinking, and I can decide what to do next. Because I just succeeded because I acted on me instead of on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And an example of acting on circumstances may be like yelling at this person or maybe something else that wouldn't be so good. But I dealt with myself. So I act on myself and I accomplish something. If I try to take action on things I don't control, I usually end up with frustration, with anger, or feeling very helpless because no matter how hard I try, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Now, most people who've lived for a while bump into that. If you're older than kind of your mid-20s, you started to experience things don't turn out the way you expect because we don't really control that. And the earlier we understand that, the better for us and probably everybody else.
Yeah.
All right, so that's in that column, in that box. If you go to the bottom row going across, that row is, again, things not changing something or unhealthy actions. So in the middle bottom, we have not changing things I control. If I don't take action or healthy actions with myself, I usually end up with regrets or guilt or remorse or feeling pretty helpless because I could have or should have done something else and I didn't do it. So I had this sort of hopeless type of place that I don't time travel and I can't go back and undo it. And I've created a bigger mess.
Yeah.
Right. So if I move the column over, I move over to the next column, and that's where I'm not trying to change things I don't control. And that's actually a good thing. I've stopped trying to arrange things that I really can't arrange. And I realize that it's not really within my sphere. I can't be everywhere I need to be. I don't know everything I need to know, and I'm not powerful enough to change it all. And I'm not that being that can do that. There's only one being that can do that, and it's not me. And that's God.
Yeah.
So if I can remind myself of that, it goes a lot better. That I don't take over those roles. That I begin to see things as they are instead of how I want them to be. And usually it's frustrating because I don't control it. And it's not turning out the way I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I work at seeing it for what it is. So all that is to say, that's all leading up really to what do we do with that? Because you and I live in a world full of things we don't control, and we have to deal with it. You know, whatever ministries you're on, you have family, whatever you're doing, if you deal with traffic or the weather, you have to deal with stuff we don't control.
Yeah.
Right?
And well, anyone in the helping professions too. It's like, I don't know, I'd say most of us struggle with that.
Yes. Well, absolutely.
You need a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Exactly. In the people business, is really true. And then there's another, sometimes this is how I keep my sanity sometimes, is looking at this grid and saying, am I doing what I control in this?
Yeah.
And that's dealing with me. Then I'm doing actually everything I can do.
Yeah.
So,
it reminds me of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and the issue of like almost enshrining victimhood.
Yes.
And I don't know if you notice this as like within that pendulum of am I beating myself up over things I don't control and taking up too much responsibility? Or is there far more of that victimhood of blaming everyone else and actually not even taking responsibility for my own actions?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they flip those columns around. The last two columns get turned around, and they kind of live in the world of things they don't control and ignore the things they do control.
Yeah. I was thinking about a friend of mine that has been homeless or in prison most of his life, and he's gotten clean, sober out of prison for the last year or so. He's on a good path. But even today, he was telling me about someone he's desperately trying to help, and this person's homeless, and she's got a 9-month-old baby, and she's got to get up, and it was like, I could just tell he was like, when she's ready, I told him, like, with a 9-month-old baby, she can walk into so many places and get off the streets, get the help that she needs, but until she decides she wants that, like, you're not going to be able to do anything,
Right.
Don't go on a crusade for her. But it's just so difficult because you want to help people without, you want to help people with a hand up,
Yeah, and I think most people in ministry, in working as I do as a counselor, psychologist, there's a sense that we really want to help people. That's part of what drives us. And the reality is we can't make them change. So we have to step back. And really the answer is staying centered in that center, focus on the center box, because in that place we have an opportunity to influence them. And by influence, it's recognizing what we can try. I love some examples that help me. It's like here we live in the Pacific Northwest with the weather. Right now it's beautiful outside. Obviously I don't control that. I didn't make that happen, and I've not been delusional to think I control that. However, I exercise a tremendous amount of influence on the effect of the weather on me. I decide every day if I'm outside or inside, if I'm wearing short sleeves or long sleeves, if I take a coat or umbrella or turn the fan on, the heater on. Those are things I can do in the moment that influences something I have absolutely no control over. Okay? That's really basic. We all get that. There's other examples, but I think that's a really, really fundamental one. But it's the same with people. There's a handful of things I can do with people. When I'm in the counseling room, or I'm talking to my wife or my kids or my grandkids, and they center around things like, what's my tone of voice? Am I going to reflect what they said to me or challenge it? And what's the words I want to use? What's my timing or even the location? All those things are usually in the sphere I can manage.
Yeah.
And if I'm thoughtful about those, I can make it more likely that we can progress. And if it doesn't, well, it doesn't. Maybe I missed something, and so I can go back saying, what did I miss? Is there another option? But sooner or later, I run out of what those options are, because on my list, it's really not very long. In most situations, maybe it's a half a dozen things that we control, and that's it. And we've exhausted those. We've probably done what we can do in the moment.
Yeah.
It is a super helpful framework. And I love that. Something we've talked to a lot of folks about in this series is just how their Christian faith influences their counseling. Right. And I'm curious if there's specific texts of scripture or places that you go in your counseling work, or even like just significant influential texts that you say, hey, this has really shaped my view of human change or of the role of counseling. Like what are some of those places that you go to in the scriptures?
If you probably asked me about 20 years ago, I'd say, oh yeah, here's some. Now I can't narrow it down. It's like I keep learning more. For example, this summer, I've been thinking and studying on several areas, Psalm 19, Psalm 8, Proverbs 8, Romans 1, and Ephesians 2. So I've been looking at those and going around about some things, and so 19, basically, the heavens declare the glory of God, okay? And then later talks about, God's scripture, the law, so Revelation, right?
The Torah. Let's throw some Hebrew in there. The 5 or 6 Hebrew words you remember from seminary,
So what's going on? God has set it up for us to know him. From the very fabric of the universe, he set it up. And then very specifically, he's written it down. How much more specific can you get? Here it is in black and white. Here it is. So the attempt is for us to know God. And so that is kind of the big picture. Narrow picture is Romans 1. That is not just a beautiful, Psalms not just beautiful poetry, but we see in Romans 1 that the Gospels now come into the judgment.
Yeah.
Right? Because what was known about God is there.
Yeah, it's made plain. Yeah.
So it's not just some beautiful idea. There's something very tangible and real about that message that will translate to judgment. So it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Right? So another of those words in that whole grouping, a couple of verses in Romans, is that God has made things by his hand. And in Greek, that's a word about like a composition, or we think like a poem or music or something. The same words used in Ephesians 2:10 about us. We are God's composition.
Yeah.
He's brought together all these unique things that we are a composition in of ourselves, but it's not just we ourselves. We're part of a bigger composition that's going on. So when part of how that's informing me is like I sit with people with all types of problems, and it helps me remember, one, I'm sitting with someone that's part of this bigger picture.
Yeah.
That they probably lost focus on, they're out of touch with. But there's something unique that they bring to the table in that. And part of it is helping me help them remember that or discover that and to draw that back out. So that's more recent thoughts. So
That's great.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of drawing people back to the Imago Dei in themselves, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, so often maybe this is just my own sort of tradition or stream, but, you know, we're very quick to say, we're sinners, we're messed up, we're broken.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that happens in Genesis 3, but Genesis 1.
Right.
And then we're made as the height of God's creation, which Psalm 8 addresses, right? As you mentioned. Right. Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
And I can see how that would play out in the counseling realm.
Yeah, it helps me keep some orientation, you know, with people and their struggles. And, you know, there's hope. There's so much more how things could be going for them.
Yeah.
So that's part of my hope for them. And so that helps fuel some of my direction.
Are most of the people that you work with, like, would they identify as Christians, or even like people in ministry? Or how do you guys kind of handle that?
That's a good question. Because we're overtly Christian, we're a Christian counseling center, most people come because of that.
Yeah.
They choose to come there, but not everybody.
Yeah.
Some people come because their parents want them to come. You know,
or their husband or wife.
Their spouse, that's right. They're in that way kind of a mandatory client. So they come for different reasons. Some people because some relative referred them and they trust that relative, and they've come in and sat in saying, you know, Dr. Fowler, my uncle or somebody, you know, said I should come talk to you. So I am. But I see you're a Christian. You know, I'm not really into that.
Yeah.
And I remember one guy said, you know, I don't want to talk about that stuff. You know, I don't want to go there. I said, all right. And no, I really don't want to go there. I said, okay. So by the third session, he's like asking me existential questions. Well, how do you deal with all this stuff? And I just kind of laughed. Said, well, you told me 2 sessions ago you didn't want to talk about that stuff. Are you changing your mind? He goes, well, this time, you know, so we did.
Yeah.
You know, it's okay. You want to talk some more? Oh, that's enough. All right. You know, and there was a few sessions later. He says, you know, what is again, these existential questions, like we're back to those. You're asking me this, do you want to hear that or not? Because he goes, well, why don't you just tell me what you think? Okay. So we would.
Yeah.
So
what do you think about Romans 7? Does that come up? As I look at that text, there's a significant like inner turmoil
Oh,
that
man.
Paul is expressing of. If anyone's not familiar with the text, right? It's the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, I find myself doing.
Right.
And wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of flesh or death? Does that? How do you process through? I know there's different interpretations of that text.
Yeah. Well, yes, there is certainly, but I guess in the first place, you're going, wow, I'm glad it's there because I relate to that. So that keeps me actually very humble.
Yeah.
And thankful.
Kind of named the human condition.
Like, wow, that's me today. Whatever it is, I think that is one of those core human experiences. That I'm doing things I don't really want to do, but I do it anyway. And I think the context of Romans is much greater than, I'm eating too much or something. It's really about fundamentally, where's our heart? What nature are we feeding or starving and so on. So for me personally, it keeps me humble. It also keeps me thankful that Christ who saved me is also one working to change out, because it's not me, as Romans 7 ends and Romans 8 begins. It's not really up to me. What's up to me is what I'm letting happen, or am I feeding something that's really going the other direction? So that's kind of that. Which way am I facing? Which one's I feeding? Am I moving toward dealing with this, or am I getting away from it?
Yeah. Like Romans 8, it goes in, it says like the mind set on the flesh is death. Yeah. Right? For it's hostile to God. But the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. Yeah. So it's that, like it takes a setting, it takes a considering and like taking responsibility for what we believe and what we think.
Yeah, and there's that delicate, that place that there's a role for us to make some choices of acting on things. What do we set our mind on? There's lots of verbs that are about doing in Scripture. Yeah. And so far, everyone I found is doing with me. I haven't really found saying I'm supposed to do on somebody else. So it's about dealing with me and then telling me about how I do that with someone else. And that's a manner of loving. Yeah. But it's my actions. Dealing with me. And so, again, it's that paradigm. I'm not here to try to do something to somebody. I'm doing me, what I'm supposed to be doing, and that has an influence or effect on other people.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Can we do kind of a meta question?
Sure.
Of, there's so much talk about mental health, in our culture right now. And especially, I think about, I don't know if you see like adolescents or the younger generation, but, you see that thrown around a lot about like a mental health crisis amongst young adults. And when you reflect on that, what kind of comes up for you about maybe the reasons for that, or how, what your calling to step into that is, or even, us as pastors, counselors, parents, just navigating this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do see some adolescents. I'm kind of selective about that because I have very limited space and have worked a lot with adolescents over the years in different types of roles. Yeah. And I would say, yes, we are in a crisis. And the reasons why, I think it's so multi-determined. But I can tell you what we're seeing, what I'm seeing. One, there's such a pressure on adolescents and kids in general. We're seeing in our clinic that the sheer numbers of people seeking help for their kids, kids struggling, the severity of what they're struggling with has become more acute. The things they're struggling with weren't even on the radar 20 years ago, and now it is. And even 10 years ago. So they're having to address things much sooner than other people would have to. And so that's much higher. causes for that, I think the most immediate is all the COVID stuff, the shutdowns. This, I think, exacerbated so many problems are already there. I don't think it caused those problems. I think it just made the cracks bigger, and now things are falling through. And so we see it glaring. And so primarily, at least in the realm I'm in, what we're seeing is more detachment and more loneliness. And that's not just kids and adolescents, that's adults. People become detached more than ever, and they've become isolated. Even though we have all this technology to connect us, we're actually more lonely as a group of people. So this thing, we have the illusion of connectedness while being more disconnected and more detached and more alone. So there's this weird thing going on, and we can fool ourselves that I have these relationships, but they're pseudo relationships. They're only when I choose, and generally people monitor and project how they want to be seen. So there are a lot of these filtered out things. So they're not really the full human being.
Yeah.
So I think those are all the more immediate things, and we could keep working backwards. That didn't just happen out of the blue in terms of our culture and changes in society, and I think the long-term effects of a move away from any sense of objective reality, objective moral ideas, all that. We've moved away from that, and as a society, those are kind of unusual things now.
Truth is stranger than it used to be.
Yeah, everyone has their own truth, and it works for them till it doesn't.
Yeah.
And there used to be a different way of thinking. We used to sometimes call it common sense. We had an idea, a more shared a sense of what made sense. But we can't even have the same dialogue about that. And so I think things are heading to more and more of a crisis that way.
So a lot of people put the blame at the feet of social media. And I definitely think that explains a lot, but I don't feel like it can explain everything, largely because social media, there's algorithms that emphasize the most divisive things, that appeal to our most animal natures. But it's also just a conglomeration of who we are and who's on the social network already. Right. And it can tend to be a vicious cycle that maybe just keeps going more and more down the toilet. But what else? So social media, definitely that's there. Social media devices early in a child's life. What else? Are there other health issues? Are there other worldview issues? Is it systemic? Well, what other factors do you see?
Yeah, I would agree about social media. I don't think it's the cause. It exacerbates it. It makes it worse. Sort of whatever you look for, you get more of, right? So whatever your brain set comes to, you're going to get more of it, and usually goes down very quickly. And there's a lot of research on that, all those things. But human beings design that, and they run it, and they make money from it, and they're driven by all those things. So, and we make choices to use it and how we use it and what apps we have and what we pay for and all those things. So there's, we can pretty much spread that, the levels of that around and saying we're all part of this thing now.
Parents give the device to the 4-year-old.
We pay for this, and then we don't train them in good choices up to the point to get it. That's one of those themes. Parents is they're in a crisis because their adolescents now is into this or that or whatever, and yet they made choices 10 years before that probably didn't set this up. That probably did set it up. They didn't make choices about how do you gradually help people become increasingly responsible. How do you make choices about things? How do you decide what's a good choice, what's a bad choice? And you didn't intentionally work that. And because I think most parents don't really have an idea how to do that. About how do you make intentional choices? So that's part. Well, that kind of ties into what else, I think there's this really idea that childhood just sort of happens and they grow up and And physically they do. And they grow up, based on what their experiences are. And I think it's our role as parents or adults to help shape that experience. If we just leave it to whatever happens, then they will be sort of this collection of whatever happens, and probably some other adults shaping that. So there's a really call for us as parents and grandparents to say, how do we shape this?
Yeah.
And not just, I'm not raising a 3-year-old or 5-year-old, I'm raising a potential adult.
Yeah.
And if I keep that in mind, this is just a step. What's a step for a 3-year-old or 5-year-old or 10-year-old? And moving toward what's generally we would call a responsible adult, and what does that look like? And so that really forces us saying, what is a responsible adult?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things we haven't really figured out.
Yeah.
And that it seems to be up in the air. So
I'd love to press in with this a little bit, because one of the first things I noticed. So I grew up around here, but then I was 7 years in New York City, and there's a lot of on the surface adults. There's a lot of very motivated 22, 25-year-olds that are renting an apartment with their own. That maybe they're even trying to prove something to wherever they came from, or their immigrant parents or whatever. And then you come here, and I think it's easy. One of the first things I observed is that, the average 22-year-old, we'll pick on young men, is not as motivated, but it's kind of more of the culture. It's a lot more culturally acceptable in the Pacific Northwest to be pretty chill about your, finding your way in life. And yet, I don't think it's not as simple as that, to say like, well, there's this extended adolescence, and I don't care if my son lives with me until he's 35, and I don't care, but there's just a lot. There's a lot there. It's. I think I'm less like doctrinaire about it. Of like, well, I got to get these guys that are living in their parents' basements out, and I got to get them married, and it's like some of them shouldn't be working a full-time job, or shouldn't be married, or shouldn't be like they're just not ready.
Yeah, they're not ready.
But it's certainly that's an issue right now. Yeah. And it is something that I've observed about like Portland.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a kind of there are the subcultures around, and there is different driving factors in those.
Yeah, what the expectations are.
Yeah. Well, what does Portlandia say? We're the city that young people go to retire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It just kind of part of the culture is entertaining single people and then pretend.
Yeah, and that you can get by. Like a lot of people can get by, or they're willing to get by on like a part-time salary. Yeah. Whereas, like the East Coast is a lot of hustle, just a lot of hustle to stay afloat.
Yeah.
Okay, so we give a hard time to young single guys in Portland.
Yeah.
But what about pastors and ministry leaders? Would you say in your counseling work or your pastoral work, is your average just Christian pastor family, are they doing better or worse than maybe the average person in their congregation, honestly?
You asked me on a bad week, man.
Or the average person in our culture. Like, so there's this mental health crisis. But honestly, I know a lot of pastors that are like so stressed out up to their eyeballs in responsibility and have like bad habits and like deal with issues or have big blow-ups and don't end up like continuing in ministry because of what blows up in their family life, or their church, or their health, or physical health. I mean, the whole story of like, oh yeah, I never took a day off for 8 years, and then my adrenal gland blew up, and I was in bed for 2 weeks. Like those kind of stories, right? That shouldn't be natural. Yeah, so maybe I loaded the deck a little bit, but what do you have an
opinion about it? Well, yeah. Do you guys want to hear the answer of this? Really? Actually, I think as a group, pastors and families are probably a little step above or in a better position than the general population. So at least in my experience with them, and it makes sense to me in a lot of ways, because Frankly, being a pastor is really hard work. It takes a certain amount of persistence, determination, some basic skills, organizing, people skills to do that.
Yeah.
And then if you have to go to more education, you have certain skill sets to be able to graduate. All those are part of it. So I think a functioning level, I would say they're above average. So they're more mature, they're more competent to deal with these things. At the same time, they're caught with the same demands, and they're supposed to be superheroes to the people they're ministering to. They're supposed to be whatever that person needs in that moment and being the best at it. It's not simply a jacket of all trades. It's really being the expert at everything. And so the demands and expectations that, people you minister to have, but also, as a leader or minister, we can have for ourselves. And we think we're supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And if we get locked into that, it's a burnout.
Yeah.
There isn't. It's one of those that right hand column of things we don't really control, and we're not even qualified to control. We're not even close, but we are working really hard on, and having little success. So that's a recipe for burnout. So that's a two-sided part of that, and it's a position that really can feed this sense of, I got to do it all.
Yeah.
And I've experienced it in different ministries I've been in, including being at Charis. In the early days, I was it. I was the executive director. I was the clinical director. I was the bookkeeper. I was the janitor. I was, hiring staff. I was doing payroll. It's like, and that sort of, I got to a point, I'll start offloading, and I just said to the board, this doesn't work. It's not good for Charis. It's not good for me. I love counseling, and to do being an executive director, I really have to stop counseling. And that's not what I want to do. So I gave them a 2-year notice. And we found Jamie within a year. So
that's great.
That, to me, has been a blessing that's multiplied. I hope Jamie feels that way. But
you have to watch the podcast.
I have to. Well, actually, I've seen it, and it's great. So she does a great job.
Okay,
she brought in all the energy that I didn't have. It was reignited a vision, has really taken us where we've never been before, and we needed to go. And now I get to be a psychologist. I get to be a supervisor. I get to train people on the things I love to do, and I'm loving that. And we've expanded the number of people, interns and trainees that we have. So that's expanding part of what we do. So it's a win-win. And so that's a kind of part win, but that's part of giving it up and saying, I can't do this. We need a different plan.
Yeah.
So that looks differently for everyone in ministry of what that looks like. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you apply that? But I think that's a reality on that right-hand column, seeing things for what it really is.
Yeah.
You can't do it all. So how do we start sharing that? And that's a really hard thing because there's so much external pressure and internal pressure to take it back.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to do it the way maybe you guys can do it or how you think it should be done.
Yeah.
But that sort of short circuits the body of Christ and other people developing gifts and growing into roles that they probably need to grow into.
That's super encouraging, even to just kind of share a little bit about that and how God brought these various people in at the right time and everything. Yeah. So early on in my ministry, the senior pastor I was working with, he said that every pastor should have, back in those days, it was a Rolodex. Every pastor should have a therapist on their Rolodex. Just like a therapist that you're connected to because, as you were saying, ministry is really hard. And it's like he was saying, which I think he was ahead of his time even, like, it's good to have a counselor that knows you, even if that you're not seeing him weekly. But that like he's someone that you can kind of pick up if you haven't seen him in a couple of years. You pick up, and what do you think about that?
I think it's a great idea. Of course, this is what I do. But actually, I see that change. There's 3 pastors now that I don't see them on a regular basis, but I'll see them at different seasons, and they say, "I just need to come in, kind of work through a couple things," and it's like, okay, cool, and that's what they use me for. And I think it's unique. They also have good support networks, but there's a place to saying, I need something else. I need maybe a different perspective. I need maybe a professional opinion. I need to think outside of the box I'm usually in. And is there something else I need to consider? Is there a bigger picture or questions I'm not asking? And someone else maybe can help me figure that out.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a role for a counselor, a psychologist that can help leaders in actually lots of different areas, because we can get sort of locked in and in our own sort of feedback loop of this is the answer when we maybe need to step out, especially if things are not working. Remember, in the tic-tac-toe, we do the things that we control with ourselves. But often one of the options is talk to somebody else. See if I'm missing something, and there may be, it's like for me, I have a core of people. They're sort of like my go-to. They're not, I have a core of counselors. I have a core of people who are not counselors, who are like regular people in my life, that they're my go-to people. I can talk about things and they help me remember, oh yeah, there's no more people out here, and think differently about things that I'm thinking about and remind me. So we need other people. And so there should be multiple realms that happens. To stay healthy. I
think we get prone to dualistic thinking. It's like the pastor's like, should I quit ministry or should I stay in ministry? Those are the 2 options. Instead of like, then you talk to a friend, you talk to a person of wisdom, and they're like, there's 1,000 things that you could do, that are, just gets you out of, like you said, your box.
Yeah. And then that's freeing. And maybe there's 101 ideas. And so the truth is there's maybe 6 that are realistic, but you got 6. Right. So maybe you didn't have those before.
So I could kind of land our discussion. I wonder if you kind of in closing, you could chat a little bit about compassion fatigue, and in particular this issue if it's burning out and taking on more responsibilities and burdens, whether it's logistics in the church administration, whether it's just caring for every single person that comes to you and asks for help, or preaching every single week of the year. This issue of burnout and compassion fatigue. How do you process that? What tools do you have in your tool belt that you share with folks that you're counseling with to help them deal with it?
Okay. Great question. Because I do deal with that, and sometimes it's worse than other times. A couple things help me in sort of big picture is basically it's what's not working. And when we're stressed, what do? We go back to what we know, what's familiar, and it doesn't mean healthy. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-to-one connection. It might be, but usually if it's going to be healthy, it's because we worked at it to get there. But usually we default to things that aren't so healthy. And then we try them that much harder. So we sort of get in this grind. We work harder at the things that really don't work well. And then we get really stuck. That's part of that fatigue. The compassion fatigue has really become a thing because it's really about the helping professions that you don't do this work, whatever, on my level, on any other level, you don't work with people without it kind of shaking loose the timbers in your life. Things start coming loose. There's a lot of dust. There's stuff that's going on there because you're dealing with people. And if you get in a relationship significantly to help them, you hear and vicariously experience a bit of what they've been through. And it should shake us up. right? If it's not shaking us up, something's wrong.
Yeah.
The problem is like it can leave us shaken, and we have a hard time putting it back together. So, and fatigue is like that's just happening over and over again. So fundamentally, I touched on some of the things for me is there's different types of relationships. So I have professional relationships, based on my coworkers. We can talk shop. And that's really important. I need that, where I can talk about this and that and what they think about this. So it's consultation. It's like I have certain people about certain things, some general things, but I can talk shop with them. Then I have people I have relationships that are outside of that. When we moved to Vancouver, it became a part of a church up there. That had a thing. It was grow groups, and they still have it going on now, 20 some years later. And we got into a grow group, and we've been essentially in the same group for over 25 years. Some of the memberships changed, but there's a core group of us who were there from the beginning when our kids were all tiny. And we sort of went through life stages together. And this is kind of the group that keeps me grounded and life outside. And yeah, they have life struggles, real struggles, but I'm not their psychologist. I'm their friend.
Yeah.
They're not my pastor. They're my friend. And we deal with life together. So that's an important group. The other relationship, of course, is with my wife. My kids are all adults now. I'm married to grandkids now. That's like this other core piece. That's another grounding piece. It's like, this is in my own sense, this is what happens after me. This is my legacy. I love what I do at Caris and stuff, and I hope what I do there means something down the road, but this is really, my legacy is my family. So that's important. So those are relationships. I think there's other really fundamental things I work at, like trying to stay healthy. And that gets to be more and more challenging as I go along. Health problems come up. But, I actively ride my bike. I do cycling events at times. I have a group of guys I do cycling with. So that's kind of a thing that helps us. And we challenge each other, to try to stay healthy. So we call each other and we laugh at each other about that. And we know the excuses already. And so we just laugh at each other. You know what that is? Yeah, I know what it is. So let's get going. So we help with that. It's trying to eat better. It's trying to do all those things. And my wife and I try not to diet. We try to make lifestyle changes. And so part of our criteria is usually about, is this sustainable? Is this something we can fit in our lifestyle or not? Because if it's not, it's a diet, and we'll do it for whatever weeks we're supposed to do it, and we can be really disciplined, and then we won't do it, and won't make any difference. So it's a lifestyle. So we've really taken that focus sort of unbeknownst to us. We weren't intentional about it. But for a long time, we just started changing, eliminating some things, adding other things. And so we keep doing that. And so it's better as we go along. Doctor's appointments and all that stuff. Keep up on that. Us guys are not really good with that. We take our car to the shop when it's broken down. It has to be towed in. Not a great strategy. Preventative things could have been
a really good way to get compassion fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. Then they're hauling me off, to whatever for me to recover. That's not a great strategy. So go in and get that addressed sooner. Those are all things I do. Things like that probably everyone needs to tweak and work at.
To think about what it is for them.
Yeah. It's really about, is it doable? Can I keep doing this?
Yeah.
And again, I earlier mentioned about, are you turning toward it? So often we say, I had these goals and stuff like that, and I believe in goals, but I also believe, am I taking a step, no matter how big? Maybe it's just a shuffle in a healthy direction. All right, I made progress. That's progress. That's success today. Tomorrow, can I do it? Can I do a couple of percents more the next day? Great. That's progress. Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to go backwards. Well, okay. All right. Now I pick up and don't have that loop going backwards very big, and I start going again. So
Yeah.
that's progress. So
Some wise words.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, that's super helpful.
good.
I think it will be helpful for pastors, church planners, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Dr. Fowler, thanks for hanging out with us
Yeah,
this
this is
afternoon.
good. This has been
a great,
fun.
Great conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Jesus in the Upper Left. We want to ask you a quick favor. Would you please subscribe so you don't miss a single episode, and share with those that are in your life that might benefit from the content. Hit the notifications button, rate and review, of course, and then head on over to upperleftshow.com where you can find bonus content, opportunities to connect with those around the city that are doing similar work as you, resources to help you, and just a way to connect to the community. We hope to see you again next time.